Hi, this is Todd Goodwin. I'd like to share with you a really interesting case study from one of my clients, and it's about claustrophobia. Claustrophobia is the fear of being trapped in a small space, and it can show up in situations like an elevator, a subway, the back seat of a car, and often, very commonly, in an airplane. And it stops people from traveling. It stops people from, in some cases, socializing, and it makes life very inconvenient, especially if you have to take the stairs 10 or 15 flights to get somewhere because you can't get in the elevator. Now, rather than getting into the most common causes of claustrophobia, I really want to discuss something a little unusual. And rather than thinking of claustrophobia as a literal fear of an environment, which it usually is, and there's some negative emotional association made between a small space and that person, so they actually begin to fear being in those types of environments. I want to share with you a story of a client of mine that really had a similar story to several other people I've worked with, and I've noticed over the years that some percentage of people with claustrophobia, the origin of which is not really relating to a physical space, but it's more of a metaphor. So I'm going to call claustrophobia, in some cases, a metaphorical fear. Our subconscious, our emotional, irrational part of us that creates fear, sometimes communicates in ways we don't really understand. In fact, very often we don't get the message. And symbology or symbolism is a big part of how we think. We think in images, and we also think in metaphor, which is why storytelling has been such an important part of our society and all cultures going back thousands of years. We remember stories better, even if it's not literally translated. So, this particular client, her symptom was claustrophobia. She had never had a bad experience in a small space. Some of the work we did immediately on that was ineffective, and it turned out with a little more digging that what she really felt trapped by was her marriage. She felt trapped in her relationship, and it manifested this fear in public restrooms and in elevators. Now, this was a relief for her because she had been dealing with this increasingly stifling marriage for quite a while, and she felt trapped. She did not believe in divorce. She knew it would not be good for her, and so she felt there was only one way forward, which was to stay married in a loveless, sexless, sometimes hostile relationship. Now, that's definitely not a good place to be, and yet that was where she found herself. And so, really, what we were able to do is draw a connection between the feeling of being trapped in the relationship with the actual external environment. And one of the ways that I helped her to eliminate the claustrophobia was to actually deal with the issues that she had in relation to herself. It's not so much dealing with the relationship with her husband, but for her to actually get to a place where she could open her mind to the possibility of divorce and deal with the shame and guilt that had been programmed into her that had actually caused her to never want to consider that as an option. Now, I'm not advocating divorce. I'm saying that if there is no option and you're in a relationship with someone who is unwilling to change and you're just stuck, it needs to be considered as a way of getting out. In her case, she ultimately ended up getting divorced after the claustrophobia was resolved. So it wasn't getting out of the relationship that cured her feeling of being trapped. It was giving herself permission to free herself. In other words, whereas a lot of people, when they feel trapped in a small space, typically, say, an airplane, and they have claustrophobia, they say, I don't feel like I could get out if I have to. I feel like I'm not in control. So she felt she was not in control in her relationship. And once she gave herself permission to get out, whether she did or not, she suddenly felt like she had some control. And it wasn't dependent on her husband it was dependent on her decision and her readiness to make that decision. Once she had that sense of freedom and it was in her own hands, the claustrophobia went away. So I'm giving this message to you as someone who may know someone who has claustrophobia, or maybe you've had something like that in the past, and also to my hypnotist colleagues out there who are watching. You don't have to take everything so literally. If someone has a fear, ask yourself, what could that mean if it were a metaphor? What could that resemble or represent? And how could some issue in their life that they've not dealt with show up as an actual tangible phobia? So it's just a different way for you to think about something like claustrophobia, and I hope that was informative and somewhat compelling and interesting to you to be more self-aware and to have a little bit of self-examination. Think about the issues in your life and how much of your response to things is based entirely on your physical perception and how much of it is based on your mental or emotional perception. So consider that and free yourself.